Hello and welcome to The Take with Sophy Ridge, live at 9, right here in the heart of Westminster. Well, the dust has settled somewhat after the drama of Monday, but there is a lot more settling to go. More than 40% of Conservative MPs voted to say they have no confidence in their own Prime Minister. Well, for now, most of them are lying low. But is that because they're ready to move on, as Boris Johnson hopes, or are they just waiting for the next opportunity to strike? Plenty for us to get stuck into as we bring you takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
In a long political career so far, I have, of course, picked up, barely begun, I have, of course, picked up political opponents all over the place.
As always with this Prime Minister, when he's falling short, he just changes the rules and lowers the bar.
Well, there was plenty of that earlier today as the leaders clashed in the Commons, as this moment hangs heavily over the Prime Minister and his party.
The Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
We'll try to assess the state of Boris Johnson's premiership and what it means for the future of the government. And in a slightly different viewers panel, we're going to be finding out specifically what Conservative voters make of all the turbulence around Boris Johnson's leadership. Here is our viewers panel tonight. All Conservative voters, say a quick hello, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you and speaking to you later on. We'll also have some top guests, including the Conservative MP Tim Loughton. We'll have Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas Symonds. And we'll be speaking to the former International Trade Secretary and the former Conservative Chief Whip, Andrew Mitchell. Much more asides too. All coming up on The Take. Hello, good evening. It was a decisive victory, according to Boris Johnson, that allows us to move on. But how easy is that going to be after the scale of the challenge from his own MPs, bigger than that faced by Theresa May, John Major, even Margaret Thatcher? And that's not to mention the 2 by-elections coming up. Oh yes, and of course, the biggest cost of living crisis for a generation. So let's crack straight on. We're going to start with the best bits of another tumultuous week.
The Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
Thank you, by the way, everybody, for all your good work yesterday, because which was a very important day, because we're able now to draw a line under the issues that our opponents want to talk about.
If 148 of his own backbenchers don't trust him, why on earth should the country?
In a long political career so far, I have, of course, picked up, barely begun, I have, of course, picked up political opponents all over the place.
Why did his Culture Secretary, I think hiding along the bench, say that successive Conservative governments left our health service wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit?
Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that when the pandemic hit, it was an entirely novel virus for which the whole world was unprepared.
Oh dear. Prime Minister. Dear, dear, dear. Pretending. Mr. Speaker, pretending no rules for Prime Minister, he chunters on. Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't. As always with this Prime Minister, when he's falling short, he just changes the rules and lowers the bar.
Week after week, I've called on this Prime Minister to resign. I've been met with a wall of noise from the Tory benches. I thought they were trying to shout me down, but all this time... But all this time, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that 41% of them have been cheering me on.
Well, it's been a huge week, and I'm really interested to find out what our viewers panel made of it all, because this week we're going to do something a little bit different. Tonight we're going to try and find out specifically what Conservative voters make of the votes of confidence in Boris Johnson and whether they think he's the right man to lead the party. So here they all are. We've got 6 Conservative voters. Thanks very much for being with us. Before we start, I'm interested to know whether you would have voted to say you had confidence in Boris Johnson or if you didn't. So if you were an MP putting your vote in on Monday, just put up your hand now if you would have voted to say you did have confidence in Boris Johnson. Hands up if you do have confidence. So that's 4 of you I can see there saying you would have voted to say you do have confidence in Boris Johnson. And what about everyone else? Who would vote to say you did not have confidence in Boris Johnson? So 2 votes there of no confidence. So a bit more faith in Boris Johnson, actually, than the MPs, just about. But in both votes, you can see there a majority supporting Boris Johnson staying on. Chloe, let's go to you first, shall we? Chloe Forrest, you're talking to us from Cumbria. Why do you say that you still have faith in Boris Johnson?
I think we've got to look at the things that he has done right. So, you know, his health and care levy, he's put billions of pounds into that, which has got us through the pandemic, ultimately, something that nobody knew about. So the problems that are being thrown at him and the things that, for example, Keir Starmer today was saying that he hasn't done right, he actually has done quite a lot right for the country and for the NHS, you know, along the way on a path that nobody had any idea about.
And it's interesting talking about the NHS because you, of course, you're a nurse, you know, you worked through the pandemic, you know, you held people's hands as they were dying during the pandemic. What do you make of the Partygate scandal? You know, some Conservative MPs have been unable to forgive that.
I think he's really messed up. I think where he went wrong mainly is the fact that he didn't just tell the truth, did he? You know, he could have just said, I've made a mistake. We've all done it. We've all made mistakes. Kind of own it and you can get on with it a little bit easier then. I think the fact that he kind of said he didn't do it and then he might have, and, you know, he was going a bit back and forward. I think that's just kind of where he let himself down a little bit. But I mean, when you look at the good that he has done as well, I think, is it the biggest thing? Probably not.
Interesting stuff. Well, let's bring in Roy now, shall we? Roy, you're talking to us from Kent. You were someone else who said that you would vote to keep Boris Johnson, that you still had confidence in Boris Johnson. Do you think now we should draw a line under it?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been consistent in the fact that he is the best of a bad bunch as far as I'm concerned. And if we have to take the country forward, we need somebody who has
I think we've just
it's just not supine, and that's unfortunately where
OK, we're losing you a little bit there, Roy. We'll come back to you if we can, but let's just bring in Rob Tyler instead, shall we? Rob, you're talking to us from Bolton. You're a science teacher. You voted Conservative at the last election. Do you still think Boris Johnson's the man for the job?
I do. I think that it's not the time really for us to look for a new leader. I think with things going on in the Ukraine, the food crisis, the fuel crisis, I wouldn't like to see a new leader now. Maybe before the next election, but I'd like the stepping down to be at the party's own pace and not a knee-jerk reaction.
It's interesting though. So you would like to see a different leader going into the next election then, you think? Why is that?
Potentially. I think that maybe a new leader untainted by the current issues that have dogged the current incumbent of number 10 could serve the Conservatives better for the next election.
And do you think that's because they might do better electorally?
Yes, if the right leader's picked, I think we could actually do much better at the next election. I think we can build on what we've already got, and with the right choice, I think we could actually build. I think we could do better for the next election than we've already done.
Interesting stuff. Anyone in particular spring to mind?
Yeah, Tom Tugendhat.
Interesting stuff. Interesting choice there. Right, let's bring in John Comerford, shall we? Now, you are talking to us from Kent. You voted Conservative at the last election. Would you vote for them again this time round with Boris Johnson as leader?
No, I wouldn't.
And why is that?
I just don't trust the man, frankly, and I voted Conservative all my life, and I'm very disappointed with the way he's behaved. I really do believe he should have resigned. I know people, I agree with Chloe and one or two other people who have said he's done some good things, but he's let a lot of people down, and particularly people that couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones, people who couldn't visit their loved ones in hospital as they were in the process of passing away. So, I just can't support that sort of man.
It's interesting you sort of talked to our team a little bit about your own experiences of the pandemic, how, you didn't leave your house, you couldn't say goodbye to relatives at their funerals. Is that sort of personal experience why you feel so strongly?
I do feel strongly. My situation is a lot better than many other people during the course of the pandemic. But at the end of the day, if the man is making the rules, he should stick by them. And I don't really believe he's done so with a clear conscience.
Would you vote Conservative with a different leader?
Oh, most certainly. I've voted Conservative all my life, and I wouldn't even think about not voting Conservative, but I will not vote for Boris Johnson.
And is there another party that you would go for, or would you just not vote at all?
I just wouldn't vote at all, which at my age, having voted ever since I was 18 years, would actually disturb me. But I think at the same time, I wouldn't want to support another party. I'm a Conservative voter. I will always be a Conservative voter, but not while Boris Johnson is in control.
Interesting stuff. Let's talk to Paul Blom now, shall we? Paul, I know that you were another one of our panellists who said that you would have voted no confidence in Boris Johnson. Just explain why.
Well, I've never been a massive fan of Boris Johnson at all. I was a Remainer, a reluctant Remainer, so I never agreed with his policy about leaving the EU. It's been generally accepted as a flawed character, I thought perhaps he might change when he became Prime Minister, but he obviously hasn't. He doesn't show any integrity. I think it's all about him rather than anything else. And I don't really think he's got the qualities to be a Prime Minister.
Would you vote Conservative at the next election if he was leader? Tough question, I know.
I probably would. But I mean, the other thing that people make out that he got such a big majority at the last election, but I think you have to consider it in the context of the election and who the alternative was. I've actually said, I think if a cardboard box was standing against Jeremy Corbyn, the cardboard box would have got into 10 Downing Street. So I'm a little bit cynical about his being praised for the big majority that he got.
Interesting stuff. Well, let's bring in.
And here's a campaign.
Sorry, what were you saying?
And I was saying, he's a good campaigner. But he's not a details man. And I think you need to be a Prime Minister. You need to be a details person.
Interesting stuff. Well, let's bring in Vic Daniels now, shall we? Vic, you told us that you would have voted to have confidence in Boris Johnson. Do you think that you're frustrated, I guess, with the MPs for voting a different way?
I can understand that, but in one sense. You started off by asking earlier, is he the right man or woman to do the job? And I think the problem is that he's the only man or woman that can do the job. If we really want the Conservatives to form the next government, there's only one person that can lead the party, and that's Boris. He's a lucky politician, and I think you can't underestimate that. He's got brand recognition. I think the word is mononymous, where you're so famous that you can be known just by one name, your first name. So it's Boris. If you said Dom or Liz or Ben or Jeremy, it's not going to mean anything. But the very fact that he's got that brand recognition, I think, being a lucky politician, he'll probably just about get it over the line next time.
So you think that he's going to lead the party into the next election then, if he's got all this luck on his side?
I think he will, and I think he'll win.
OK, and let's just go back to Roy, shall we? Because we lost you last time, didn't we, Roy? Just talk to us quickly about your feelings about the confidence vote. Why do you think Boris Johnson is still the right man?
Because he has chutzpah. The rest, I just think, are supine. They will. They lack the big picture, and you know, one of the other commentators said that he's not a details person. It's not a details person we need. We need somebody with a grand vision, really, as to where the country should be going in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and not just concentrating on the next news cycle, which is where I think over the last 24, 36 months is where the country has been. Politicians have been gravitating towards what the next news interview is going to be on broadcast media. And that's been the problem, I think, and that's why Brexit didn't happen in the way it should have happened, and why we made certain mistakes, I think, during the pandemic.
Right, just to end, I asked you to all have a piece of pen and a paper. I'm hoping this is going to go smoothly, we'll have to see. If you could write down on your piece of paper the name of the person you would like to see lead the Conservative Party into the next general election. So it could be Boris Johnson, it could be another candidate. Who do you think is the person you would like to see lead the Conservative Party into the next election? We're getting a couple in now. I can see Roy's gone for Boris, Rob's gone for Tom Tugendhat. I can see Paul has gone for Ben Wallace or Tom Tugendhat, so that name again. Chloe's gone for Sajid Javid. John, can you just move your paper a little bit further away? Jeremy Hunt, that is. And then Vic Daniels. Who have you gone for? Have you got your piece of paper ready? Can you hold it a little bit further up? Up. A little bit further? Boris. OK, another for Boris Johnson. Perfect. Well, that is interesting, because I think that even though the majority of you guys would have voted to have confidence in Boris Johnson, only 2 of you say that he's your preferred candidate for the next election. Really interesting. Plenty for number 10 and the wider Conservative Party to think about there. And we can speak now to a Conservative MP, somebody who has publicly called for the Prime Minister to go. Thank you so much for being on the programme tonight. Tim Loughton, who is a former Children's Minister in the Department for Education, Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, joins us now. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
So how did you vote on Monday and why?
I, with regret, voted that I didn't have confidence in Boris. I made my position clear way back in January that I thought his position had become untenable. I don't think anything has happened since then to change that view, probably the reverse. So without making a fuss about it, without giving lots of interviews and writing articles about it, I said to my constituents who asked that I would vote that I had no confidence, with regret. The vote happened, the vote went the other way. We accept that vote and move on. It's
interesting. As you say, you haven't done much media around it. You made your position clear. You say you want to move on. Does that mean you're ready to just draw a line under it? You want Boris Johnson to lead the party into the next election? Well, the problem is, I don't think this is going to end it. We've had a clear vote, and we must abide by the rules. I absolutely respect that result. The Prime Minister remains the Prime Minister and the leader of the Conservative Party. But that's not ended it. This has gone on for over 6 months. I can't think of any other problem that has overhung a Prime Minister or a government minister. And you're talking about the Partygate, effectively. The whole Partygate. And this started way before Christmas, if you remember. We've still got the Privileges Committee report to come out at some stage. We've still got the report into the whole handling of COVID. And various other things are still going to come out over the next few weeks. What's going to happen with Keir Starmer? If Keir Starmer were to be given a fixed penalty notice, it makes the Prime Minister's position look a bit doubtful as well. So I fear this isn't going to draw a line under it. So I think the Prime Minister's got a big job of work to show that he's back at the helm. He needs to absolutely rally around the party and build a unified party, have some changes in the cabinet. Rather fewer people saying, yes, of course, Boris, and a few more saying, are you nuts, Prime Minister, would be helpful. If he can do that, he might just start to win back the confidence, but there's a big question mark over that. So you'd like to see a reshuffle, effectively with people who are prepared to stand up to him a bit more? I think we need to have a cabinet, as we've had before. If you go back to Mrs Thatcher's time, she didn't surround herself with yes men and women, or hardly any women. It was people that she fundamentally disagreed with, but would take them on. People who would say to her, are you sure that's what you want to do? Actually, I think you're wrong. And she would say, well, I think I'm right, and this is why. We need more of that sort of debate in Cabinet. We need far more backbenchers. There's huge talent on the backbenches
who are not playing any part in government at the moment, who have got a lot to offer. So I think Boris has got to absolutely extend a hand of friendship and be much more inclusive to many more people in the party, where there is a lot of talent that's not being used.
Is there any names that you would give us for examples of those kind of...
No, because then we'll start getting into arguments about why him and not her or whatever. I think backbenchers feel a bit neglected, and I think the clear-up that happened in number 10 had to happen, but it hasn't gone far enough. We need to be talked to a lot more. We need to be consulted about policy a lot more. And we don't need this problem where we're marched up to the top of the hill to defend things which are a bit tricky.
Indefensible, some would say.
Some would say indefensible, only for 24 hours later, number 10 to do a complete U-turn and we're marched all the way down again. These are the sorts of things that undermined confidence in even David Cameron and Theresa May previously. So we've got a huge challenge facing us. The country's got a huge challenge with the cost of living crisis, with the continuing issues around Ukraine and lots of other things. We need absolutely to be focused on that and delivering for the people, not having debates amongst ourselves about whether our leader is up to being leader or not.
Are there policy changes that you would like to see as well?
Well, I don't think this is largely about policies. If you look at previous Prime Ministers that were got rid of, poll tax, Mrs Thatcher started the slide there. This hasn't been about policy. I'm afraid it's been about the way the Prime Minister has personally handled what started as Partygate. And for me, it was never about how many glasses of warm Chardonnay were quaffed in Downing Street or sausage rolls eaten. It was about the way it was handled. And that then became the issue rather than the so-called parties themselves.
And by the way it was handled, do you mean lack of contrition or not really accepting blame?
Well, I think a lack of contrition. And I think, as one of your panellists actually said earlier, if he at the beginning had actually owned it and said, actually, I think we might have committed some offences here. Actually, I didn't realise, but in retrospect, I think we shouldn't have done it this way. And so we need to investigate if we've actually committed any crimes at all, and absolutely owned it from the start. I think if he put his hands up, rather than trying to say, no, nothing went wrong, there were no parties. Oh, there were parties, but they were all within the rules. And, oh, but I wasn't at any of these parties. Oh, but then, actually, I might have been at a party. And that the credibility just drifted. That was the problem. So getting back that confidence of people that his integrity is intact, and that he's capable of carrying on with his job is going to be a big challenge. But people want to see a Prime Minister and a government getting on with the job of the challenges facing everybody in their everyday lives, which are considerable.
I just wonder what you make of the Prime Minister's reaction to the confidence vote. He's described it as a very good result and decisive victory. Do you think he gets it?
Well, he clearly wasn't. I mean, the margin was much tighter than most people had expected, and certainly he had wanted. And again, I think he needs to own that. I think he needs to say, look, OK, we have got a problem, which is why I think he needs to bring people inside the tent who have opposed him in some cases, candidates who stood against him, who frankly should have been in the cabinet right from the start, to try and get unity together again and to get those people firing on all cylinders at the jobs that all those cabinet ministers need to be doing in a government that's delivering for the people.
I'm quite intrigued as to whether or not some of the rebels are likely to have another go. According to the current rules of the 1922 committee, the Prime Minister now can't be challenged for a year. But, of course, those rules can be changed. Is that an active discussion?
No, and I think what's different about this is a really interesting piece in the Times by William Hague yesterday about when there are plots to get rid of leaders. This wasn't an organised one where there was a clear alternative contender. This was quite a few people who were a bit discontented, you know, like me and others, thinking, actually, we've got to do better than this. There wasn't sort of some organised campaign. I think the few people who like to claim that they were running organised campaign, it didn't actually happen like that. The rules are the rules. We've had a result. Under the rules, that result stands. It doesn't look good if within days of that result you try to start changing the rules. So I'm not really interested in that. If the Prime Minister absolutely realises that his position continues to be untenable, as some people have said, and I said back in January, then it's for him to make the decision to resign until there could possibly be a challenge a year out. We're getting closer to an election. People don't elect parties that are divided. We need a strong, clear leader with strong leadership, with a good, solid cabinet and ministers firing on all cylinders. That's his challenge in the next few weeks if he's to stand any chance of going to the next election as the leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister.
What do you think his chances are of going into that election?
I honestly don't know. It's really difficult to tell because, look, all sorts of things have happened in the last few months that have come out of nowhere. And I think if there are more Partygate type mishaps, to put it mildly, then his position becomes more and more untenable. You know, the trouble is this time, many of us had people writing to us saying that the behaviour of the Prime Minister has been absolutely disgraceful, but they've said that about the last Conservative Prime Minister or anything the Conservative government does. There have been quite a few actual Conservatives who said, look, I've voted Conservative all my life and I know they're Conservatives in my constituency and I can't do so if Boris is
heard one
still
of them
there.
on the panel.
Absolutely. So he's got to be able to win those people back to stand a fighting chance of being a successful leader to win the next election for us. And the jury's out on that. But he is the leader. We've re-elected him as the leader. We need to get on with the job of him as Prime Minister and a government that's doing stuff that's outside of Westminster, not looking in on ourselves.
OK, fascinating to talk. Thank you very much for coming on the programme tonight. Well, a little bit later, we will get Labour's take on all of that. But first, we can have a little chat and work out what we've learned so far. We're joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Hi, Sam. Interesting stuff on the panel, first of all. 4 out of the 6 saying that they would have voted to have confidence in Boris Johnson, but then the majority picked a different candidate to lead the Conservatives into the next election.
That was fascinating, was it? And I think that captures the difficulty that many Conservatives are finding in trying to navigate the complexity of the situation that we've got at the moment. And I thought it was interesting from Tim Loughton as well, because on the one hand, he was saying we've just effectively re-endorsed Boris Johnson. There's got to be a path for redemption. And he set out some criteria. But those criteria sounded incredibly difficult for Boris Johnson to actually satisfy. Bring in new voices, new names into a cabinet, which he effectively said was weak, but also restore integrity when Tim Loughton himself was saying, well, effectively, you've got somebody who lied about Partygate and he needs to change his style. People ask, is Boris Johnson going to survive? I think for him to be toppled, there's got to be more of a sense amongst the rebels of how that might happen. I wasn't clear from Tim if that was going to be the case. When that might happen, could it be after the by-elections, could it be later? There's no agreement about that. And they've got to decide who. And that is also deeply unclear.
And that's the problem. We had such a disparate group of people and factions and personalities voting against him.
So many people and none, really. There is no name that I think anyone coalesces about. For when Conservatives voted on Monday, they weren't voting what it was said on the ballot paper. They weren't voting about whether or not they had confidence in Boris Johnson. They were trying to work out whether or not keeping Boris Johnson would be better or worse than having a messy leadership contest, exposing all of the divisions that exist inside the Conservative Party, be they personal and be they policy, and then a new leader who might not be as good as Boris Johnson was in 2019, or keeping the incumbent as damaged as he is.
Interesting stuff. And he also did say that he had weeks, I think, to try and sort that out. Sam, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. You're watching The Take. We are live here in Westminster. Up next, we're going to be talking to Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary, Nick Symonds. Hello, welcome back live to Westminster. You're watching The Take. Now, for Labour, it must be tempting to sit back and watch the Conservatives tear themselves apart over Boris Johnson's leadership. But the opposition does face questions itself, especially how it would respond to the ever-deepening cost of living crisis. We can speak now to Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary, Nick Symonds. Thanks very much for being with us today. I mean, what an extraordinary week it's been. 40% of Conservative MPs voting to say they've had no confidence in their Prime Minister. Do you think Keir Starmer missed a bit of a trick at Prime Minister's questions at not really pushing that?
No, I thought that Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions today actually pushed the reality that people are facing in the NHS in England, unable to get a GP appointment, the waits at A&E, the cancer waiting lists that have been going up over the past 12 years. And that's the reality people are facing. And we have a government now that isn't dealing with those issues. What we've seen this week is a government in absolute chaos. We have 148 Conservative MPs who agree with us as an opposition that they've no confidence whatsoever in the Prime Minister. Then you've got 211 Conservative MPs who are saying that the Prime Minister's law-breaking, the Prime Minister's contempt for people's sacrifices during the pandemic is an acceptable thing that they can support. What you now have is a divided Conservative Party that isn't going to be able to tackle the challenges of the country.
Do you think, though, I mean, Boris Johnson argues that, look, he's got the vote out of the way, he's drawn a line under it, he's got a majority, and actually, you know, even if you speak to the most fierce critics, like Tim Loughton, who we just had on the programme, they seem to accept the result. Do you think that he's now going to lead the Conservatives into the next election?
Whether the Prime Minister leads the Conservatives into the next election or not, we will be making the case that we've had 12 years of Conservative failure. And looking at it from the opposition benches this week, let's not hide from what's happened here. A majority of the Conservative MPs has voted to support this Prime Minister. This is a Prime Minister whose focus is on saving himself. This is a government. We saw a document Conservative MPs had put around saying that the purpose of this government is actually to keep the Prime Minister in office. They are not focused on the problems.
I mean, to be fair, they would say that, you know, in just the last few weeks, they have launched a bumper package to help with the cost of living, going further than the Labour Party would have done with the windfall tax and on energy bills. So, you know, it's not right to say that they're not doing anything, is it?
The Conservative Party has been in power for 12 years, is tired and out of ideas. It's Labour that's made the political weather. It's the windfall tax proposal that we actually pushed for months and months. And if, by the way, they'd adopted it 5 months ago, nearly 6 months ago, when we first spoke about it, people would have been in a much better position now. They are out of ideas, and this is a tired government.
Now, on the 21st of June, we're expecting strikes on the trains or on the underground network. The RMT say that it's going to be the biggest outbreak of industrial action in the UK since 1989. Do you back the strikes?
What I would like to see is a resolution to this. Nobody ever wants to see strikes. Nobody wants to see workers in a position of making those sacrifices. Nobody wants to see the disruption that this is going to cause to the public. And what we need to see...
Just to come in, though, because, I mean, no one would disagree that you want to see a resolution. The question is, you know, where do you get that resolution? If you can't reach one, would you like strikes? So do you back strikes under the current situation?
What I want to see is more dialogue. We've seen the 3 dates that the RMT has spoken about. There is still absolutely time for dialogue. That dialogue has to take place. And we can't have either government ministers somehow washing their hands of responsibility about this.
So more dialogue, does that mean that the RMT should pause the strikes in favour of more dialogue? Is that what you're saying?
But there is still time available. We're not right up against, at the moment, the date that the RMT is saying. I think it's the 21st of June is the first date that they're talking about. There is time for dialogue. We need to get all the parties around the table. It needs to be the government, by the way, not distracted permanently as they are by their own internal problems, who actually take some responsibility for facilitating these talks and preventing that strikes from happening.
I spoke to the RMT's Mick Lynch on the Sunday programme a couple of weeks ago. He said, I've seen no response from the Labour front bench that says we support the workers in their struggles. If we just get this bland Democratic Party sitting in the centre of politics, taking their instructions off the Daily Mail to some extent and not actually getting behind workers' struggles, you have to ask yourself, why do they actually call themselves the Labour Party?
Well, I don't agree with that interpretation. We are on the side of working people up and down the country, whether they're working in the rail industry, whether they are in the wider public, working in many other industries. What we need to see is an actual cost of living package. We need an emergency budget. We shouldn't be having the national insurance increase that we're having at the moment.
Can you see why Mick Lynch thinks that the Labour Party is a bit bland? If you just say, oh, yeah, we want more dialogue, but it feels like you're not really giving a definitive answer on what you feel about the strikes.
No, I fundamentally disagree, because I think strike action is always difficult and dialogue is the only way that you find a solution. So that's why I'm urging that dialogue in those particular circumstances. But I don't accept at all that what we said about the cost of living is somehow bland. It's our campaigning on the windfall tax that's caused the government to actually have to adopt our policy. We are the ones calling for an emergency budget, saying there shouldn't be the national insurance increase. We're the ones who are talking about investing, a climate investment pledge, £28 billion each year, insulating homes up and down the country. We are the party that is putting those ideas forward.
Do you support the government's package on the cost of living?
We've been very clear on things like where the Chancellor actually reduced fuel duty, that of course those are things that we would support. But the idea that what the Chancellor has put forward is sufficient for what everybody out there is actually facing, I'm afraid, is for the birds. It isn't. And what the Chancellor has had to do already is to come back when we pushed him to do so. He should come back again with an emergency budget.
But with what in the emergency budget, what specifically would you like to see?
Right, well, first of all, let's see the reversal of the national insurance increase. Let's see the Chancellor of the Exchequer take away VAT on energy, for example, is another thing that the Chancellor could do. And let's see the Chancellor as well, for once, actually have a long-term plan for tackling growth. In the 10 years before the pandemic, the average growth per year was running at below 2%. There needs to be a strategy for growth. And in my area of international trade, by the way, we see the government rushing to complete initial trade deals. But what they're not doing, and I see it because I'm out there visiting exporters on the front line, they're not providing the support to businesses and to exporters that they need to actually be able to make those trade deals work for communities up and down the country.
OK, thank you very much for being on the show today, Nick, Thomas Symonds there. Now, of course, the question that everyone is asking here in Westminster is what next for the Conservatives who voted against Boris Johnson? Will they accept the result and move on? Will they demand Boris Johnson makes policy changes or perhaps reshuffles his top team, as Tim Loughton was saying earlier? Or will they try and find another way of changing leader before the next general election? Our political editor, Beth Rigby, spoke to David Davis and Aaron Bell a little bit earlier to try and find out. She started by asking if the Conservatives could win a general election under Boris Johnson.
Well, I think if he does these changes, yeah, we have a decent chance. I mean, you know, we're 2 years away, so it's hard to say. But if we don't do them, I'm reasonably sure we won't win. That's the issue. People...
You might change your mind on him.
Well, if he does the right thing in the next year, but he's got to do the right things in the next year because that's the time which will deliver in time for an election. You know, if people are not able to live their normal lives ordinarily, you know, with reasonable chances of getting things done, reasonable chance of earning money, enough money to spend, that sort of thing, that's what they'll judge on. They won't be judging, frankly, on gossip column issues in 2 years' time. They'll be judging on how they and their children and their parents are getting on, how the state's looking after them, and how the ordinary day-to-day life is working. We've got to fix lots of things in that area. Boris can provide the leadership to do that, but he's got to set out to do it. It's not just big decisions, it's a whole spectrum of leadership.
Has he got the right team around him, though, in the Cabinet?
Well, he's got to make that call. I mean, he should be looking at the sort of things I've been listing and saying, why has this not been put right? Why has this been let go wrong? You know, who has not done their job? You know, he has to change them for people who will do the job.
It is a trying time when parties are having these internal disputes, and that's why I would like to see us pull back together again, and I'd like to see the Prime Minister reach out to some of the people who did vote against him and find a way to bring some of them into government and find a way...
What does that look like?
I don't know, it's not up to me. I mean, I'm not asking for...
From your point of view?
I'm certainly not asking for a job myself, but I do think that it would be helpful if the top team reflected the vote, let's put it like that.
What do you mean?
I mean that there should be some representatives of the kind of people that have felt left out by this government. You don't get 148 votes from nowhere. Well, my seat right now is, if you look at the calculus, you know, websites and so on, he's on a knife edge. So I have got a vested interest in Boris Johnson turning this round. That's why I would like to see him do that.
Now, it's our regular chance to speak to a backbencher as we pick our Prime Minister's question of the week. It's something a little bit different that caught our eye during the session earlier, and today it was this one.
Is he aware that there are 5 alleged Rwandan war crimes perpetrators living freely in the UK who have been doing so now for 16 years and have neither been extradited nor put before the British courts under our existing laws? As he prepares to go down to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, will he look carefully at this issue because it is bound to be raised with him?
Well, now, of course, usually the questioner doesn't get a chance to respond to the Prime Minister's answer. We're trying to put that right, so each week letting that MP do just that. So that question this week was from the Conservative MP, Andrew Mitchell. He's a former International Trade Secretary, once the Conservative Party Chief Whip as well, so knows where all the bodies are buried. He joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us. Just explain a little bit about why you decided to answer that question today.
Well, I came up in the reshuffle, in the shuffle. So I try to get a question every week, and it's actually over a year since I got a place on the order paper. So it seemed to me a good thing to do ahead of the Commonwealth Government, Heads of Government meeting. And for this reason, that the government has been very strong, quite rightly, on going after the war criminals who are perpetrating these atrocities in Ukraine. But for 16 years now, these fugitives from Rwandan justice, who are alleged perpetrators of hideous war crimes, have been living in plain sight in the UK. 16 years, neither extradited, as the Rwandans wish, nor tried under British laws. These are terrible crimes of which they are accused. And of course, in Africa, many people say, well, this is because they're not white Europeans. The British judicial system, the British don't care about the fact that these are murdered black Africans. They only care about white Europeans. That's why they take such a strong line in Ukraine. And as a British Member of Parliament, I'm very offended by that, but the evidence is there on the table. 16 years, they've not been sent back to Rwanda, as so many other countries have done with those who the Rwandan government has sought to extradite, and they're not being tried under the British system either, and the police say it will take years and years to address this point, and it isn't good enough, and it's very bad for Britain's international reputation.
And what did you make of the Prime Minister's response to your question?
Well, I mean, you know, he's not obviously very familiar with this issue, but he promised that he would get familiar with this issue, and that was my aim and purpose, that when he goes down to Rwanda, undoubtedly, you know, the president of Rwanda will say to him, you're very happy to send your asylum seekers here. Why aren't you either prosecuting in the UK or sending back to Rwanda these people who are alleged to have committed the most terrible crimes against our citizens?
You mentioned there the deal struck between the UK and Rwanda to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. The first plane due to leave next week, but of course it's had this challenge in the High Courts. Do you think that policy needs to be dropped?
Well, I think that the Rwandans have a very good reputation for helping out with humanitarian situations. They have taken desperate people who were caught off the coast of Libya from the struggle there and given them a new life in Rwanda. And the Rwandans are trying to be helpful in a humanitarian way. They did the same thing for the Israelis. But my issue with the policy is that I don't think it'll work, and it's incredibly expensive for the British taxpayer. I'm not opposed to Britain, if someone comes here illegally, seeks asylum, is processed in the UK and is then turned down for asylum, if then the British wish to deport them to Rwanda and Rwanda's willing to take them, I wouldn't be against that. But this is a policy which will be extremely difficult to implement, will be hideously expensive for taxpayers, and I just don't think it'll work. That's my main objection.
How popular do you think these kind of policies are with the electorate? It felt like for years, in a way, being tough on immigration was been seen as a bit of a badge of honour, something that would always go down well with the population at large. Do you think that's changed?
Well, I think that this is I think this has brought up a lot of people up short. It's just not the sort of thing we would normally do. And actually, you know, there's no alternative but to do the hard yards of processing people properly, employing more staff to process them when they get here, having a better relationship with the French. I mean, you can't do anything about the core problem, which is people coming across the Channel in a leaky boat, putting themselves into the hands of the modern-day equivalent of the slave trader. You've got that's the prime problem. You've got to have a deal with the French. So that's the second thing you need to do. And you need to revise the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees, because that was set up before there was mass travel, before there was climate change-driven migration. And there's really no alternative but to do those hard, difficult things if you're going to get this problem under control. And saying you're going to ship a few of them off halfway around the world, you know, it's not very nice, and it's not really the way Britain does these things.
Another policy where you need to do the hard yards is what's happening in Northern Ireland and the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol there. Lots of people extremely concerned about it. The whole administration, of course, not up and running until it is sorted. Now, the government is claiming that it's legal for it to act unilaterally to change parts of the protocol. Do you think, in your view, it is?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, and I would rely on independent legal advice on that point. But I do think that the European Union is being extremely difficult. I think they need to be much more sympathetic and understanding about the issue of the border in Northern Ireland and the problem this is creating, which we do not want to imperil the peace agreements that have been set in Northern Ireland. And I've been in the House of Commons long enough to remember those terrible statements made after atrocities took place. You know, we need to honour the agreements that have been reached. So I think the EU need to be more sensitive. But equally, you know, you don't sign a big international treaty and then a few months later decide you want to go back on your word. And the last thing Britain needs now, when our economy is so stretched at the moment and there are these huge difficulties with the cost of living, is to have a trade war with Europe where the Americans, our closest ally, are on the side of Europe. So this is a time now for very cool heads, very good negotiation and a real understanding by both sides of the issues here. But I do think the European Union is not being as helpful or as sensitive to these big international problems as we have a right to expect.
Now, of course, this week, I think 41% of Conservative MPs voted to say they had no confidence in Boris Johnson. You were one of them. What would you like to see from Boris Johnson going forward to get your trust back in him?
Well, I think he needs to govern in the same way he did when he was Mayor of London. He needs to up his game as Prime Minister and the problems he's seeking to address. I think there's a whole range of things he needs to do. There's a lack of coherence in a lot of policy. These are very big issues to do with energy costs, the cost of living, inflation, growth. You know, the critical thing in the British economy is to increase the level of growth. And we need a laser-like attention from the Prime Minister. And you know, if 32 colleagues change their minds, he will be out of office. But we need to get on with tackling the problems that my constituents have sent me to Westminster to try and address and not go on about this day after day.
Do you think there could be another vote then? You said that it just takes another 32 to change their minds.
Well, there won't be another vote at the moment for a year, and we've got to respect the conventions. That's as things stand, but there's a lot of events. You know, in politics, it's events which come around the corner and surprise you. And the key thing is he's got to get on with the job now of delivering the best possible answers to these very, very serious problems. And this sort of lack of grip on policy has got to be addressed.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Thank you. Andrew Mitchell there. You're watching The Take. We're live in Westminster. Next, we're going to round up everything we just heard and do a bit of post-match analysis with our Deputy Political Editor. Hello, welcome back live to Westminster after a pretty tumultuous week. You are watching The Take. We've had lots of takes this evening. Time now for our regular post-match roundup with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's with us here. Sam, what I'm really intrigued by is, you know, we've heard from our panel, we've heard from Conservative MPs. Where is number 10 at?
Well, I think that number 10 have a massive decision to make. Now, you heard on your show, all of your interviews, the people that Beth Rigby was talking to, the rebels, all saying Boris Johnson's got to change his style, widen the tent, bring in some of his critics. The question is, will he? Yesterday, Sky News did a survey and we discovered that there are 12 ministers and ministerial aides still in government, having not even said in public that they back Boris Johnson. And the test for Boris Johnson, the question is he pragmatic and inclusive, and does he keep these people in government, or is there an element of revenge? Does he start sacking in a reshuffle sooner or later the kind of people who weren't standing solidly behind him? So where is he? Well, I'm hearing reports of MPs that were rebels going up to him yesterday at events, asking him how he was, and the Prime Minister saying, "I'm fine, no thanks to you," and walking off. Or one ally, Tory MP of the Prime Minister, going and seeing him in his office, only to find Boris Johnson asking them, "Did you vote for me? Can you prove it?" Now, all of that points to a mindset of a Prime Minister who feels wounded, who feels hurt. I suspect the big decision of being inclusive or taking revenge hasn't been taken yet, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
Fascinating. And really, as you say, goes against the calls of Aaron Bell, of Tim Loughton, to see some of critics effectively being brought into the tent. Perhaps unsurprising for a Prime Minister who often values loyalty among other qualities. Sam, thank you very much. That is it for The Take this week. We'll be back next week and every week, Wednesday at 9 p.m. Next up, it's Sky News at 10. Thanks for watching.